In the late 20th century, a secretive spiritual group emerged in Europe and North America, built on promises of hidden knowledge, cosmic purpose, and transcendence beyond the modern world. To those on the inside, it offered structure, meaning, and the belief that they were chosen to participate in something far larger than themselves. What followed is not a story of sudden collapse, but one of gradual transformation, a story of how an organization founded on esoteric belief evolved into something increasingly isolated, dangerous, and ultimately fatal. This episode traces their progression, beginning with its origins and ideas, moving through its rise and expansion, and concluding with the coordinated final acts that brought global attention to its name. This is the Order of the Solar Temple. The Order of the Solar Temple emerged during a period marked by widespread spiritual experimentation and delusionment with traditional institutions. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, alternative belief systems flourished across Europe, blending elements of mysticism, esoteric Christianity, New Age philosophy, and apocalyptic thought. It was within this environment that the foundations of the order were laid. The group was shaped primarily by two men, Joseph de Mambro, a French occultist with a background in secret societies, and Luc Jouret, a Belgian physician and charismatic public speaker. Together they presented a worldview combining ancient symbolism with modern anxieties. Central to their teaching was the idea that humanity stood at the end of a corrupted cycle, and that a chosen few could prepare for a transition to a higher plane of existence. This transition, they claimed, was linked to cosmic forces, sacred geometry, and an unseen spiritual hierarchy guiding human destiny. The recruitment focused on individuals seeking meaning, order, and certainty in an increasingly unstable world. Many members were educated professionals, doctors, architects, business owners, drawn not by chaos, but by discipline. The order emphasized structure, secrecy, and gradual initiation. Members were divided into inner and outer circles, each granted access to different levels of knowledge. Advancement was framed as spiritual progress, reinforcing loyalty while limiting dissent. Ritual played a central role from the beginning. Ceremonies incorporated robes, symbolic objects, and references to the medieval Knights Templar, positioning the group as heirs to an ancient and persecuted tradition. Leadership presented themselves not merely as teachers, but as intermediaries between the material world and higher forces, entrusted with guidance others could not access on their own. As the order expanded into Switzerland, France, and later Canada, financial contributions became a measure of commitment. Members were encouraged to invest heavily, emotionally and materially, in the organization's future. Questioning leadership was reframed as spiritual weakness, while obedience was presented as preparation for what lay ahead. Over time, external relationships were subtly devalued, replaced by shared identity rooted entirely within the group. In its early years, the Order of the Solar Temple did not appear openly threatening. It functioned quietly, deliberately, and with an air of legitimacy. Yet beneath its calm surface, its beliefs were already moving towards absolutes. ideas that allowed no compromise, no retreat, and no alternative interpretation of reality. Within the theology of the Order of the Solar Temple, Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, was not a symbol, but an authority. Known as the Blue Star, it was believed to have announced itself roughly 26,000 years ago, initiating a cosmic timetable that could not be altered or escaped. Human history, in this view, unfolded according to rigid astrological ages, and the present era was framed as a terminal phase. The transition from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius was described not as renewal, but as annihilation. The Earth, the Order thought, was approaching a moment of cleansing destruction, consumed by fire as part of necessary cosmic correction. Against this expectation, the group positioned itself as a prepared remnant, bound together by knowledge and obedience, tasked with enduring the rest of what humanity would not. Sirius was also described as the origin point of higher beings known as the Ascended Masters, entities portrayed as evolved intelligences overseeing the fate of the universe. According to the Order, these beings had already intervened in human history and now existed beyond ordinary perception, guiding events from hidden realms. Physical bodies were treated as temporary containers, disposable once their purpose was fulfilled. Death itself was reframed as a technical process, an exit rather than an ending. Advanced members were taught that through initiation, they could learn to abandon the physical form deliberately, aligning themselves with the Masters and completing their passage towards Sirius. Within this belief system, hesitation was failure, attachment was corruption, and the body was merely something to be left behind when the signal was given. As the Order of the Solar Temple moved towards its final phase, its leadership formed what they described as a transit to Sirius. In internal doctrine, this was explicitly defined as something other than self-destruction in the conventional sense. The group's leaders divided members into categories based on loyalty and perceived spiritual readiness. Those labelled as traitors were marked for execution. Others, considered too weak to act independently, were to be killed by fellow members and described as being helped to transit. Only a select group, deemed fully awakened, were expected to end their own lives voluntarily. The leadership taught that death would result in the acquisition of so-called solar bodies, allowing adherents to continue existence elsewhere in the cosmos, most often Sirius, though sometimes Jupiter or Venus. These beliefs were laid out in a series of letters known collectively as the Testament, which were mailed to journalists, acquaintances, and institutions shortly before the events unfolded. In the final act of rebranding, the organization briefly renamed itself Alliance Rosy Cross in September 1994, presenting the change as a continuation rather than an ending. The first wave of killings occurred in late September and early October 1994 and spanned Canada and Switzerland. In Morin Heights, Quebec, former members Antonio and Nikki Dutoit were lured to a chalet owned by Joseph DeMambro. They and their infant child were stabbed to death in what investigators later described as a ritualized execution ordered by DeMambro himself. The perpetrators then traveled to Switzerland, while others remained behind to clean the scene and prepare for their own deaths. Days later, the chalet was set on fire, killing those inside. Almost simultaneously, additional coordinated killings took place in Chieri and Selvan, Switzerland. In Chieri, over 20 people were shot after being sedated, while in Salvan, victims were injected with poison. Fires were deliberately set to destroy the sites and bodies. On October 5th, Swiss authorities responding to multiple fires discovered dozens of bodies arranged in ceremonial fashion. Connections between the Canadian and Swiss sites soon became clear, revealing a coordinated international operation rather than isolated incidents. Investigators later determined that the leadership had invested significant effort in controlling the narrative after death. Documents, letters, and recordings were prepared in advance to frame the killings as voluntary and enlightened transitions. Evidence that contradicted this narrative was deliberately destroyed, though mechanical failings in some incendiary devices left behind computers, written material, and audio recordings that provided insight into the group's internal planning. According to testimony from a surviving member, the leaders had intended for exactly 54 people to die, mirroring the number of Knights Templar executed in the 14th century, which they believed would allow immediate contact with those historical figures. When one intended participant fled at the last moment, the final count fell short. Subsequent investigations concluded that only a minority of those who died could be confirmed as having acted voluntarily, undermining the group's own portrayal of events. The violence did not end in 1994. In December 1995, 16 members died in a remote clearing in the Vercors region of France, their bodies arranged in a circular star formation. Investigators concluded that the victims had been sedated before being shot, after which the bodies were set on fire. The plot was later linked to a devoted former member who claimed ongoing communication with the group's deceased leaders. In March 1997, a final incident occurred in Saint-Casimir, Quebec, where 5 remaining members died after setting fire to their home. Letters sent to Canadian media outlets framed the death as a final transit to another world. By the time the last site was discovered, the Order of the Solar Temple had ceased to exist, leaving behind one of the most systematically orchestrated episodes of cult violence in modern history. That concludes this entry, but every shadow leads to another trace, and every trace to another unanswered question. If you want the next case as soon as it resurfaces, stay with us. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and step back into the dark with Noctombre.